On computer. And we're off. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. Those that are live and those that are going to be watching this later on YouTube. Thank you for watching. What we plan on doing today is having a more so informal lecture given by Dr. Thomas Riggins on the relevance of Lenin today. Dr. Riggins spent many years teaching philosophy at NYU and New School for Social Research, both which are two of the most prestigious institutions in philosophy in the country. And he's also has spent his life as a militant communist as well. So he's definitely someone Eddie and I, look up to a lot and are very eager to hear him speak on Lenin, his legacy, and what is the relevance that Lenin has for us today. What can we learn from Lenin? Too many people look at figures like Lenin, Guevara, and other revolutionaries and just see them as militants. But the truth is that what they brought up to the table theoretically is tremendous, and you can't separate the things that they did in practice with the things that they did in theory. In fact, I think both of them sort of influenced each other quite a bit. So thank you if you're listening to the talk live. Thank you. And remember that you can ask questions on the chat throughout the event, and we'll pick a few at the end to do a short Q&A section. So thank you, and let's get started.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about 5 works of Lenin and just point out how they are still relevant today. And so this will be rather brief because I'm more interested in what questions people have. I'm sure that people have read either all of them or some of them, and they might have questions about them, or they might just want to have their own opinions about Lenin. The first one is, what is to be done? The importance of that book is it is still the case that working people on their own, as we see in this country, 70 million of them voting for Trump or whatever, are not going to arrive at socialism just from economic reasons and struggles in unions and trying to get better wages. That the idea of actually how capitalism works and how it can be overthrown and turn into a system of socialism or mutate into a system of socialism is something that has to be brought to them from the bourgeois intellectuals. And Marx and Engels and Lenin were intellectuals. Lenin was even in the nobility. His father was a hereditary noble. And he was a lawyer. He went through law school. So that's the most important thing I think we can do about what is to be done. It is we have to organize a political party on Marxist lines whose job is to act as a vanguard in the working class, because that party is supposed to have the most advanced progressive ideas and how those ideas can be brought about. And the worrisome part of that is many parties claiming to be Marxist have taken a position that they're afraid to actually bring the idea of communism and Marxism to the workers because they're not ready for it. So they spend their time basically reformed and being progressive, but not mentioning what the final goal is of the party or what that movement is. And they think they can build a bigger mass movement by postponing the talk of socialism and not getting into socialism until all these reforms are made. Well, the capitalism is not going to reform itself. So this, what Lenin would call revisionist idea, will just perpetuate itself down the road. All right, that's that one. The next book that's important is Materialism and Imperial Criticism. This is a philosophy work in which Lenin lays out what is the basic foundation of materialist philosophy behind dialectical materialism. He wrote this before he read Hegel. I'm not going to talk about Hegel today, but he read Hegel later on and kept a notebook on Hegel and what he thought was important in Hegel. Many people who are Hegelian or like Hegel, and you can like Hegel, he's fine, you know, for his time, think that that book somehow negates, those notebooks somehow negates his position in imperial criticism, materialism, imperial criticism, but it doesn't. There's no contradiction between his positions in imperial criticism. He would reformulate them a little bit to more in conformity with some ideas he got from Hegel, but there's no real overthrow of his position. And he just dropped my notes. I have to wait a minute here. I gotta find them. Okay. Oh, well, they're gone into a crack somewhere. Okay, anyway, his position in that book can be boiled down simply to this. When you are a materialist, you're not committed to having to be a materialist in the sense of a strict determinist. You don't have any particular materialist philosophy you have to agree to, such as the type of physics they had in the 19th century before quantum mechanics came along. All you have to do to really be a materialist is to agree that the world system that we live in, however you want to picture it, existed before there were human beings. And it is not a product of the human mind or of any conscious mind. It's a given external reality, then we have to deal with it. And so that book is very interesting because he criticizes all of the major philosophers of his day that took idealist positions. And he does trace us back. He mentions Hegel, and he mentions Descartes, and he mentions Spinoza. Spinoza is sort of the grandfather of, or the great-grandfather of dialectical materialism. Hegel's the grandfather, and Marx and Engels are the father, and Lenin is the word made flesh and dwelt among us. So that's an important book. The next book after that is Imperialism, the Final Stage of Capitalism. That final stage he thought was pretty near. It's sort of like Jesus telling his followers he'd be back before some of them died. He took a long time, he hasn't come back yet. And the state, as the final stage of capitalism, seems to be roaring along pretty good. It outlasted the Soviet Union, which was supposed to be the replacement or the model for the replacement. But nevertheless, the idea that this system is an exploitative system, that it is full of economic problems that it cannot solve except by induced or uninduced crises that cause suffering, unemployment, wars to masses of people, so that the system can then reconstitute itself with new markets and new production facilities. That this is cyclical amongst capitalist countries and capitalist system, and that periods of peace and prosperity are few and far between. I think the United States has been almost constantly at war somewhere in the world since the end of World War II. It's been in Korea, it's been in Vietnam, it's in Iraq, and it's tooling up to go fight China. That's going to be a nice part of the century. The book after that I want to talk about, that I think of these still relevant for us, is State and Revolution. The problem with State and Revolution is this is where Lenin says that it is not going to be possible to replace capitalism by peaceful evolutionary electoral politics, which is what almost every communist party in Europe and South America and in this country are counting on. None of them are actually talking about revolution. And that's okay, because we're not in a revolutionary period. But to think that this stasis period is going to last forever, that's what's incorrect. There will be collapses and worldwide economic collapses. They may be the result of completely external natural conditions that Marx probably didn't think of, which we have, like the climate change. They predicting that it's going to really hit third world countries and drive millions of people up to the Mediterranean. They're all going to come into Europe. And that's why we're getting new fascist movements growing up in Europe and anti-African. They want the Arabs out. And that's why we are building walls on our own border down there to keep people out. They're being driven up here both because of starvation. Our economic policies down there have wiped out, for instance, many productive small farms in Mexico, and those farmers have no place to go but come up here. And also political situations where you get fascist regimes. So state and revolution is still relevant. The point is in that even if you get a democratically elected socialist government, you are going to face the Allende phenomenon. And that is the military is not the military of the people. The military is the military of the corporations or the landowners and it's a ruling class military. And if push comes to shove, the military will step in and put down any democratically elected government. So we have to be prepared. Communist movements have to have a plan B. They just can't count on we're going to win the elections and everybody's going to be won over. Euro communists thought that. I read Carrey thought they would win over the army would become communist as they did propaganda and stuff. Franco's army, by the way, which is still there. Okay, so that book is still relevant. And there's another book. Oh, yes, Leftwing Communism and Infantile Disorder. That's an important book. That is a book that is used by every revisionist in the world to justify any type of compromise that comes down the road to postpone having to talk about revolutionary situations. But that's not the purpose of the book. The purpose of the book, as he said, a left-wing infantile disorder, Engels says it's ultra-left people are ultra-left because they don't understand what the nature of compromise is. You're not compromising on principle. Compromise is always a tactic that you have to adopt, judging the relative strength of the opposition. And if you're just going to sit down and talk about revolution, 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 regardless of the strength of the opposition, whether the people are aware of it or know about what's going on, whether they're class conscious or not class conscious, you are going to adhere to the maximum program. That, he says, is infantile. And you should learn by being knocked down in the struggle enough that those tactics won't work. And that you have to make compromises, not on principle. You don't compromise on racism, for instance, and say, we're going to vote for this racist because he's less of a racist than the other one. But you do have to compromise to get allies who are not at your level of consciousness. Of course, Marxists think we're at the top, you know. So as long as we're up there, we're the vanguard. We can't get it into our head that we can dictate to other groups what they have to think. All we can do is present what we believe and work with them in the movement. And if we're right, then they will learn from struggle that our position is right. And if we're wrong, we'll learn and change our position. Because the important thing that we must remember from Lenin is that Marxism is a method of analyzing reality to try and improve it and lead to socialism, but it's not a dogma. There's no dogma like the church has. Everyone has to sign up to it and believe this, that, or the other thing. And if we're dialecticians, we realize everything's in flux and changes. What's here today is gone tomorrow. What the proof of that, of course, is we use that dialectics to show that capitalism is a temporary system. But it also applied to the Soviet Union. Dialectics didn't stop at the door of people trying to build socialism, and that fluxed right out of existence and back into capitalism. So people didn't understand the power of the dialectic. The one sentence in the philosophical notebooks that gives people problems is Lenin says that if people have not read and understood, that's the bad part, Hegel's logic, they don't understand Marxism. And he says, consequently, none of the Marxists have understood Marxism. A little footnote there. He obviously didn't consider Marx and Engels in that group or himself, but all the Plekhanov and all the other people, all of them didn't understand the logic. Well, the logic, if you've ever looked at it, has a well-deserved reputation of being the most difficult book ever written in philosophy. And so to demand understanding it when there are like 5 different interpretations going around about what Hegel meant, it's a pretty tough requirement that Lenin has laid upon us to study that book. But it is important to understand the dialectic, and Hegel is the guy who invented the dialectic, and we have to understand what Lenin really wants us to do is understand how that dialectic works and change it from the idealistic roots that it came out of and reroot it in materialism. Now, Marx says in the beginning of Capital, he says he found Hegel standing on his head and he put him on his feet. And that first chapter of Das Kapital on commodities, he wrote that in deliberate Hegelian jargon, he said, just to show, because Hegel was being called a dead dog and being insulted by the philosophers of the day. And although he didn't agree with Hegel on lots of things, he did say Hegel was that mighty thinker and that he wrote that first chapter to show respect for Hegel. But that's a stumbling block for almost everybody that reads Capital, because when they begin in chapter 1, they go, oh God, when's this going to end? And when they get to the end of that chapter, they are pooped out and they don't read the rest of Capital. Then the secret is don't read chapter 1. Read everything else first. You don't really need that chapter 1 to understand what comes next. And then you can go back and read chapter 1 as a sort of masochistic reward for getting through. That's the first volume. Don't bother about volumes 2 and 3. You have to read those, of course, but the real stumbling block is that very first chapter. 80% of the people that don't read, that give up on Capital, have given up because they couldn't get through chapter 1. So that tribute to Hegel, he thought was a good thing to do. And that's an easy chapter compared to Hegel. So you can see the other part is, Lenin is evidently planning for this to be a 1,000-year struggle or something. Okay, so that's a brief synopsis of why I think Lenin is still relevant today. He's relevant in how we organize. He's relevant in how we operate with allies that are not at our level. He's relevant on what type of philosophical positions we should have. And one other contemporary thing is, what is our relation with religion? There are lots of religious people. Some of them are Quakers and Catholics that go around pouring their blood on draft cards and stuff. So we support that. Others are evangelical Christians that support Trump. What is our position towards religion is Marxists are atheists. We don't believe in God. We don't believe in spiritual reality. We don't think there's a dimension that escapes from the laws of physics. But we don't have to make religion an issue. People are allowed to have religion. They're allowed to have they're going to have their own consciousness. It's life and struggle that gives people their consciousness. And if they want to be religious, that's fine. We don't attack religion. We don't make religious rules like you can't be a member of the Communist Party if you're religious. But what you can't do is try to bring religion into the movement and start replacing the Internationale with hymns and things like that. That's going a little too far. Okay, so that is Lenin in a nutshell.
Perfect, thank you. Very interesting stuff. We have a few good questions. Again, for those of you that ask questions that I won't be able to get to, I'm sorry. One second, because Eddie said he's muted. So let me see if I figure out how to unmute him. For those of you that asked questions and we weren't able to get to them, I'm sorry, but I'm going to give you the first question now. All right, so one of the interesting questions that I saw that popped up, it was in relation to Luxembourg, but it had to do with Lenin's Vanguardism, and the question was, is there a role for Vanguardism in the US? As far as what we see in Latin American movements with 21st century socialism and stuff like that, they have really criticized the exporting of the model of Vanguardism. So do you think there's a role for a vanguard in a revolutionary movement in the US?
Well, it all depends on what you think a vanguard is. The vanguard is simply that Lenin said, we believe, if we're Marxists, as a Midwest Marxist, right? If you're a Midwest Marxist, you are a Marxist because you think that that is the most advanced and correct social philosophy to solve the problems of the exploitation of humanity that has been around since the Neolithic, okay? Since the end of primitive communism, to get rid of the state and get rid of classes and get everybody hunky-dory. It's Marxism is the road to go down. So that vanguardism simply means that we have the most advanced philosophy. If we think we can browbeat people into adopting that, then vanguardism isn't going to work. And some groups that try to do that, they don't work. They will fail. But we keep that up our sleeve and we can work with people. And if we want to recruit people into our party, we want to build a mass party, we have to then make their consciousness congruent with the ideas that Marxists believe in. And in that sense of being a vanguard, then every party that exists, whatever, the Democratic Party, the people that run the Democratic Party, they think they're the vanguard. They think they have the best party to run a capitalist government here in the United States, and that we have to throw bones to and chum the waters to keep the workers happy. The Republicans think they have the best. 70 million people out there think Trump is God's gift to humanity. So that's a vanguard. They have vanguard ideas too. We think their vanguard ideas are incorrect, and we don't consider them a vanguard, even a rear guard. So yes, the vanguard is important, and we have to be the vanguard. Lenin said, it's not our job to run after the working class. I hear this from communist leaders here in this country say, oh no, we can't bring this up now. We have to go for Clinton, or we have to go for Biden, because that's where the workers are. We can't go get ahead of the workers. You got to go with them. Well, it's no, you have to be ahead of them, because they won't go any further than trade union stuff. They won't go any further than liberal Democrats, and liberal Democrats will turn them in the first chance they get if there's a real threat to the system. So yes, the simple answer is yes, there is a role for vanguardism. That's happening down in Venezuela right now. The Communist Party in Venezuela has complained that Maduro is going backwards. And he's abandoning the Chavez view, and that they haven't broken they ran their own candidates. Well, they didn't get very far, but
they tried.
The vanguard has this problem of being sometimes you're up there all by yourself. And, hey, where are the rest of the troops? You know. But that's what a Medal of Honor is for.
All right, Carlos, you want to go, or you want me to ask the next question?
Yeah, if you want, yeah.
I saw a question asking about Trotsky, and it was asking specifically what you thought of Trotsky going from being an academic to a man of action. But then I also wanted to ask, just because I see a lot of people kind of with this conception that Trotsky was Lenin's best friend. Lenin wanted Trotsky to take over the Soviet Union after his death, but Stalin had Trotsky killed and then just seized power. So could you talk about what Lenin's actual relationship was to Trotsky, maybe?
Well, they had a contradictory relationship almost up to the revolution itself, because Trotsky was in the opposition to Menshevik, and but he saw that Lenin was correct, that the revolution would take place, it would work, they could take power. He didn't think they would be able to, but Lenin convinced him. And so he switched over and he became, Lenin, he was the de facto guy running the Soviet Union for a while there, in the sense that he was the commander of the Red Army. Lenin made him the commander-in-chief of the whole military operation that not only entrenched the revolution, but threw out the white armies and put down the Civil War. And so Lenin didn't see any problem with Trotsky at all, or for that matter, with Stalin. Stalin made a mistake of getting uppity with Krupskaya. That pissed off Lenin. And he told in his testament, if you read it, he told the people that Stalin didn't have the temperament. He was rude and didn't have the temperament to be general secretary. You gotta be rude to people. You gotta be nice if you're gonna be general secretary. But he didn't have any disagreement with his ideological things. He said they should appoint someone who thinks exactly like Stalin, except that they're not rude and bossy. So it was a personality problem, not an ideological problem. And he thought that there would be problems for the future if this antagonism between Trotsky and Stalin was not overcome, that they had to be reconciled. So that's the relation with Lenin. That will was read at the Politburo meeting where Lenin said, pick a different general secretary rather than Stalin, and Trotsky voted to keep Stalin. So there you go. You know, that's it. You voted for your own ice pick.
I think there's an interesting question that just popped up. It's one we asked in our last interview to a buddy of ours who's a trade unionist. What do you see as being the relationship between the national labor struggles and the proletariat at home and international movements for socialism and the international proletariat overall?
That's a big question. Well, the AFLCIO is definitely a pro-American union, international union. They even have a division of them that works with the CIA and unions overseas to put opposition to Marxist unions and to support like Christian unions and bourgeois unions. So the AFL-CIO is definitely not in any way pro-socialist. It wants this system, it believes in this system. All they want is a bigger slice of the pie, and that will keep them happy. And by the way, the working class, if it isn't starving, actually starving, you know, outside the wonders it has made, people don't want to fight in revolutions. They don't want to have violence and their families disrupted. If you give them good jobs, and as we did after World War II, housing, and they could afford a car, you could own your own house. Engels said once the workers are owning their own houses, they've gone into the capitalist class. They own property. You know, you're only supposed to own your skill. That's it. You got to work. Well, they still have to skill. So they're semi-proletarian. They're still proletarians, even though they think they own their own house. The fact is the banks usually own it and they get kicked out if they can't. Their rent payments are basically just mortgage payments or rent payments. So the unions here are not themselves, some of them are very progressive. Progressive in the sense of for getting benefits for their workers. They're progressive. They are, but they haven't gone beyond the Democratic Party in their consciousness of struggle. And some of them go Republican. A lot of the, what do you do with the civil service unions made up of firemen and policemen? I mean, those people are proletarians. They don't own property. They don't own anything in the system. They get paid salaries and wages. but they're very reactionary because they are given certain privileges by the ruling class that other workers don't have. Like you can go around and shoot people and not get in trouble, which is something you want to keep. I like that one. But internationally, the labor movement is also split in a lot of European countries. You have Christian labor unions. Catholic countries have Christian labor unions that are not, they are for social welfare, the social democratic states, the welfare states. There's the Labour Party in England. The Labour Party in England is basically a conservative party in the sense that it's not out to overthrow the government over there. It might support a republic, you know, I get rid of the queen, fine, but they're not pushing that. But they are a revolutionary party compared to what we have over here. So we're sort of isolated as the #1 capitalist country with all the money. We used to have it all, was here. We could pay off our working class with, we could divide them with racism, and the black people, the minority people are 10% of the population, you know, the other 80, 90% will be more than happy to work in this system if they get decent wages. If they see the next generation, my kids will be better than me, blah, blah, blah. That has ended over here and it hasn't set in yet. There's a movement now. You can talk about socialism. You can even talk about communism. People don't freak out. The DSA has got like 50,000, I don't know, members. I mean, the DSA is not a Marxist group, but it's openly socialist, and we have very progressive Democrats, AOC and the Squad. Those are, it's very important that consciousness, they are raising people's consciousness, and that's a stage going to have to go through before they can. They're now in the chrysalis stage. Before they come out as Marxist butterflies, they have to go through that.
Well, I think that's a good segue. We had someone ask about what your thoughts were on how this whole AOC and Jimmy Dore split regarding whether they withhold the vote for Nancy Pelosi as Speaker of the House, and so in order to force a vote for Medicare for all. How does that split that's going on in the progressive forces in the US, how does that give us an insight into what the position of the left is today and where we're at in the struggle?
Well, the left is fragmented. There's a Marxist left and there's a liberal left. There's the Democrats. I think AOC is a member of the Democratic Socialist America. I'm not sure whether she maintained it, but she was at least at one time. I read somewhere that she wasn't a member anymore, and somebody else wrote that she was. I don't know, but I know she's very sympathetic to that group. The question of Nancy Pelosi is simply a question of real politics. They don't have the votes to dislodge Nancy Pelosi, so to waste time fighting a battle when they should be spending all of their time trying to get legislation to improve the working class and to get relief for the COVID is a bad policy, because what working people are going to see is, well, they're just wasting time up there. Where's the checks? I need the checks to pay my rent. I'm going to be evicted, and they're fighting to get rid of Nancy Pelosi when they, you know, what's going on. And they in fact lost in the last election a few seats. They didn't gain any seats they didn't take over the Senate. Maybe they will in January, but a big if. They got to get both of those Georgia seats. So though I think that type of fight is a distraction. They should be, the left in the Congress, the AOC people and people who are sympathetic to those views, they should not be squabbling with each other about whether or not to keep Nancy Pelosi. They should be united together to try and get legislation that still working people see that their left is fighting for them and not bothering squalling with each other.
Yeah, interesting. You mentioned in part of the lecture that famous second preface from the German edition of Capital, where Marx talks about flipping Hegel on his feet. And before that, you had mentioned Lenin's comments in Materialism and Empirical Criticism, where he states that we should read Hegel, that you have to understand the science of logic in order to understand Marxism. And when you mentioned Capital, you mentioned that we have to, that sort of Althusserian point that we should read the first chapter after we read everything else. So I guess the question is, like, those two views seem to be not contradictory, but slightly in conflict. So what is the role of understanding the dialectic through Hegel? In what is the role of understanding Hegel and understanding Marx, essentially?
Well, it's what Lenin says in his notebooks.
Mhm.
He read the logic. He makes excerpts from the logic into his notebooks. So, hint number one, you pick up the logic. You got this big gigantic book. It looks, when you start reading it, you think, this is gobbledygook land. It's really not. It's just that the way the Hegel thinks is different from the way lots of people think. And he's thinking dialectically until you get the rhythm of what's going on. And you need a couple of good commentaries while you're reading it to figure out, exactly what he's saying. But the hint is the paragraphs to concentrate on are the ones that Lenin put down in his notebook, which are like just a few pages compared to the whole logic, okay? So you get those pages down, you can find where they are in the logic and then read above and below them and gradually get more and more understanding of it. But it's to understand how contradiction works and what the laws of dialectics are, so that you don't think in terms of essences, like, well, capitalism, you can never fight City Hall, and why bother to vote, because it'll always be the same, when it's not the same. There was a radical change in this country when Trump took over. He completely, just today, the New York Times says they just passed through, he just turned over all public lands to the corporations against all the unions, and all the minority groups and the Indian tribes are against that. He pushed it through because he can do it. He's doing everything he can before he gets kicked out to it looks like he hates the environment. He wants to destroy it. But all he wants to do is let the capitalists do whatever they want with it. So we lost all of the, almost all of our environmental protections, the Water Act, the Air Pollution Act, there's Car Safety Act, all those things he put in people in the EPA who are anti-environmentalists. So, I mean, you couldn't even get a good, decent impeachment against him. They didn't even bother to listen. I mean, they voted, the Republicans said, look, we're going to find him not guilty before we even have the trial. We could go through the motion. So they wouldn't even listen. Before that, the Democrats and the Republicans were much cleverer in how they control the rest of us by being bipartisan. But now they really split the country. You have half the country, almost half the country thinks that Biden got in through electoral fraud. Well, he actually got in because the capitalist class is tired of Trump, because Trump is giving the United States, ruining its international reputation. It's losing its leadership role, and they want that leadership role back. They think, Biden even says that he thinks, the United States has to be the leader. And you can see everything that we have done, the rest of the world has not followed us, not out of Paris, not against Iran, not against getting rid of the nuclear deals. It's everything he's done on his own. The only good thing that I think he did was make buddy with Kim Jong-un over North Korea. I can't believe it. He's still over there. It's not Putin.
Eddie, do you have one last question? I think I have a good question here to sort of wrap it up, but if you have something else you want to ask before we go.
Since we've talked about a lot of in-depth and complex topics here related to, you know, the history of Marxism and the development of the intellectual tradition, but a bunch of people I think in here are just beginning. So there were about 3 people who asked, what are your just top 3 picks for beginners, or what are a couple books you would recommend for people just getting started?
Well, this is just for Marxism or for understanding Hegel and philosophy in general, or?
I think they just meant for Marxism. Yeah, I think it said top 3 Marxist theory recommendations. Yeah, I think people are just looking for a starting point for
okay, they should be. Everybody knows the first one, right? Communist Manifesto. No problem with that one. After that, Anti-Düring, because that book, Engels, Marx, they collaborated more or less on that. Engels wrote 90% of it. Marx wrote 1 chapter on economics, but the whole range of ideas, philosophy, economics, history is in that book. So that is the one book. If the world comes to an end and we have to send a book out into space to free the Martians, Anti-Düring should be that book. Okay. Not the Bible, but Anti-Düring, or the Quran for that matter. God can reveal himself again. That we only had Engels once. So there's 2 books. Now the 3rd book should be something from Lenin. And there it's that you have a treasure trove of books. All the ones I mentioned are important ones, but maybe State and Revolution or Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism. Those are both they're not all that long. You could throw them in there. So you got 4 books, and then you would have to branch out on your own.
Yeah, and for those that are starting, that the ones that asked the question, we are doing a series right now on YouTube. Eddie's doing it for Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism, and we're doing a Sunday series with Dr. Riggins with Anti-Düring, that he's going chapter by chapter and breaking down the text very nicely. So for those of you that are starting, if you want to follow that, that'd be great as well. Actually, that last, what are the 3 books that you would recommend? That was the sort of final question that I was thinking about. But Eddie, if you don't have anything else to ask, I would just ask you, is there anything you would recommend? Because our audience is quite young. Is there anything you would recommend for young people who are looking at their future and it looks pretty dull in terms of the environmental catastrophes that seem to be coming, and in terms of the fact that this is the first American generation predicted to do worse than their parents? What's the solution? You know, it's our generation likes to think of quick solutions. So what is the solution you would give to the generation, both in terms of long-term and in terms of short-term things that they can start doing towards that final sort of long-term solution?
I was once upon a time a young person, and I thought by the time I had a gray beard, see, you have a nice black one, that I would be living in a socialist United States. So I'm not sure I have any recommendations I can give young people, seeing as all my little ideals of what was going to work have been sort of didn't pan out so good. I just tell them to read, study the Marxist works, and they should read a book by Marcuse called, I can't remember the name of it now because I lost my notes. It's Reason and Revolution, I think is the name of it. It's Hegel and the Rise of Social Theory is the subtitle. But he wrote it in the 1940s, and in there he explains so that anyone can understand the Hegelian system, why Hegel's important. He doesn't use Hegelian jargon. It's a really great book. Marcuse was my generation's, I wasn't a Marcuse guy at the time. I've always been an old-fashioned Marxist Soviet type guy. But, I didn't read One Dimensional Man. It came out in '64, and that was the 60s. I think I read that last year and said, oh, that's what I was about. So I missed the mainstream there. But that's a good book, Hegel and the Rise of Social Theory. It also explains what it's topical on fascism, really explains what fascism is and what the Nazis are. And there's, besides Marcuse, whose philosophy is always interesting, Angela Davis got her PhD under him. Well, no, she didn't. She got a master's degree under him, but she studied under him. She got her PhD over in Germany, I think. And there's another guy they should read called Lukács. Okay, he wrote a book on the young Hegel. So the young Hegel, relatively, he only lived to be 61. The young Hegel, though, he talks about the phenomenology and the logic. Lukács is a little more difficult to read. Oh, what happened?
Huh.
I'm seeing pictures of Me Gusta and a little somebody showed me their little child. That's nice. And who is trained like a madman back there? This is not the, I think my background picture is better than yours. There's my.
Oh, this is Alexander Karelin. He's a wrestler for the Soviet Union.
Well, he's an old man now. If he's a wrestler for the Soviet Union, he's at the Senior Olympics.
He's a politician now in Russia.
Putinite, I presume.
Probably.
That's something we didn't get into, is what is the role of Russia after the revolution was overthrown there. Is, do we see Putin as a progressive force or a reactionary force? Or this is where understanding Hegel and dialectics is important. He can be a reactionary domestically and a progressive internationally. So there you have a problem. People say, how can you reconcile that? But that's one of the problems with dialectics. You say, look, it looks like we have two entirely different ideas here. And Gabby Color, who is this guy, Gabby? That baby is back.
I don't know why they're
You are viewing Gabby Color Rosa's screen. Okay, Gabby. Why am I viewing your screen? It says options. Let's see if I have an option. I hate to do. Oh, Gabby's gone.
I had to pull a Stalinist move and just kick
Gabby. Gave her the ice pick.
Hey.
So what were you stating? You were talking about the dialectical presence of Putin.
Well, the idea of the dialectics is the reconciliation of opposites, the unity of opposites. This is, by the way, when people say there's no difference between communism and fascism. They say, oh, it went around in a circle so that Stalin and Hitler meet each other. And so, but you have to see, look, though you have two completely contradictory systems. They hated each other so much that one had to destroy the other. So you can't say people, you say opposites attract, but opposites don't attract if they kill each other off. And so the imperialist capitalist system reached its most desperate thing when it relied on Nazism to try and the German capitalists turned to the Nazis to try to get their power back because they lost in World War I. World War II is an extension of World War I from our view. And that they fought against a working class state. If you want to be an orthodox, a working class state, if the person asks a Trotsky question there, it's a little Trotskyist flavoring, and then it's a degenerate working class state. But it's a working class state, one way or the other. And that was able to unify the people, the Russian people, who were not as economically advanced as Germany was. And I think they got hit by 3 million Nazi soldiers coming in there, and they defeated them. So that's only to commit Carrey later on. So they did that too. So that's another question. The legacy of Stalin. Who is responsible for that that suicide that the Soviet Union made? Is it Khrushchev, or is it set in motion by Stalin? And there you have your Trotsky problem. The Trotskyists think it was Stalin that did it, and other people say, no, you left a big, strong country. It was Khrushchev did it. Or maybe it was in the seeds at the very beginning. Lenin did say that if the revolution, while he thought there was going to be a world revolution when in 1918, and that France and Germany would be the next countries to have that revolution, they would come to the aid of the Soviet Union. And he said that he didn't think their revolution could survive if there wasn't a revolution in the West that could come to its aid. Well, there wasn't a revolution in the West. And nobody wanted to say, okay, fine, let's just give up. So they tried to do it on their own, and that may just have been just not feasible, because somewhere along the line, they lost contact with their masses of their people. And although they built a society that gave free education and practically rent-free living, guaranteed income, they lost the loyalty of the people. And the people didn't come out for them when Yeltsin decided to leave the Soviet Union. The workers didn't come out of the factories and say, no, we're keeping socialism. We own this state. They didn't feel it was their state anymore. Somewhere along the line, that happened. That didn't happen under Stalin. They thought Stalin was their guy. And they still, Putin wanted to take him out of his little, well, Putin wanted to take Lenin out of his tomb. He couldn't take Lenin out of his tomb because he's afraid of the social backlash. And they are now promoting Stalin again. And World War II is unifying to get the people together. So they're stuck with Stalin.
Yeah, one of the arguments that's pretty interesting that Grover Furr gives is that the flaw in Stalin is how did after Stalin work out, right? The flaw must be somewhere in there, because something happened after Stalin where it all was a downward spiral. But yeah, we could probably leave that for a chat another day. We could probably do the same thing with the live audience.
I can't imagine Grover finding a flaw in Stalin. It would have to be after.
Yeah. Yeah.
Shooting Buchanan in the back of the head wasn't a flaw. Although many people think that was a bit extreme for an ideological difference.
Definitely. It was a pleasure, and we hope to do this again with different topics. We know you have a wealth of knowledge in there that as true capitalists we must exploit. So
yeah.
we're hoping to do more of these, and I think it was pretty successful. We had at one point close to 60 people on, and quite a few questions and active chats. So.
At one point they quickly deserted. Not a good sign.
All righty, sounds good. Thank you to everyone that was here. Thank you, Dr. Riggins, for participating in this. And like I mentioned, we hope to do something similar to this again in the future. And